Hey everyone, thanks for checking out another Hot Metal Fab YouTube video. In this one, we're going to be installing a swing out on the Eimkeith bumper that we installed previously. Step one is going to be cleaning up and preparing the hinge. It's got some mill scale on it, so I'm just going to use a lathe to knock all that mill scale off, make sure it's clean and clear for when I weld on it. Then the bearing races go in. I start pushing the races in with the bearings in place, but after that I use some special tooling I made up to get the races themselves in without the bearing in place. Then I'll go ahead and install everything, make sure everything's fitted correctly. I had to remove the customer's CB antenna mount just to make sure the hinge fit without any interference. I'm going to go ahead and tack weld all of the corners of the hinge itself. I'm going to eventually weld the hinge assembly onto the bumper, but not just yet. Right here, all I am doing is welding the hinge componentry together. Probably going to remove it a couple of times and make sure everything's fully welded out. But I'm not going to do that until the actual swing out itself gets built, and that's what I'm going to start doing here, where I'm going to cut the swing arm tube. Now the material I'm using here is 1 3/4, 3/16 wall tubing. This customer's probably going to put a good bit of weight on there. He said that he wanted to do a couple of jerry cans. The tire itself, he may go with a 35, and he'll be able to put pretty much whatever else he wants on there. So I'm going to make sure this swing arm base tube is pretty beefy. Now, I tried to set up both of the clamp blocks on the Rogue Fab bender, but it just wasn't possible. The tube was too heavy. It was hard to get it set up by myself, and I didn't want to trouble anyone else. So I just did it one clamp block at a time, and the nice thing about the Rogue Fab bender and having a nice flat table is that you can reset the clamp blocks and make sure that both blends are coplanar and straight and parallel and in line with each other. So I went ahead and did that, did some test fitting. I bent the ends to 20 degrees each. That's what the outside face of the Eimkeith bumper dictates, and just to keep the flow of the bumper, I made sure that that's what I matched the tube up with when I bent it. I'm going to make sure it's level, make sure it's straight, make sure it's square. I'm going to go ahead and get it tack welded onto the hinge. After that, I'm going to start building the rest of the swing out. Shortly, I'm going to pop open a program called Bendtech, and Bendtech's going to calculate the tubing that I need to use so I don't have any waste. It's going to tell me where to actually bend the tubing and how much to bend it to. I probably could have figured out by hand, but it really only took me maybe a maximum of 30 seconds to set it up on Bendtech. Once I do that, I'll put the clamp blocks where it told me to do so. I'm going to bend each end to 90, and it gives me an outside to outside of 48 inches, which just seems to work with the back end of the 3rd Gen 4Runner on an Eimkeith bumper. Once that's bent up, checked on the truck just quickly, I'll go ahead and notch each end so it fits around the swing arm tube nice and neat. It'll give me nice neat welds. I won't have any gaps to deal with. I'll go ahead and deburr it and then actually set it on there. I'm only going to use magnets for now. I'm not going to tack weld it. I'm going to put some center support tubes in there as well, and if this was actually tack welded, it'd actually be really difficult to get those tubes in. There'd probably be some hammer work, and I just don't want hammer marks on all of my tubing. I'm going to make sure it's all straight and square level before I put these center support tubes in. I'm going to do that much at least, but it can all be adjusted since it's not tack welded. I initially only wanted to do one center support tube, but then a little bit later on I decided, well, this customer is going to have some adjustability needs out of the swing out, so I actually decided to do 2 tubes. I did use this one to help me determine where the center of the tube with 2 bends is, as well as where the center of the swing arm tube is, at least in relation to where the truck is. After that, I went ahead and made a 2nd tube, same way I did the first one, and set that up. I got the idea to install these Molle plates on the outside, so I'm actually going to go ahead and start drawing those up. Now these Molle plates, I'm going to make them out of 10 gauge hot rolled, pickled, and oiled material. The holes that are going to be on the Molle panel, they're going to be 1/2-inch holes set up for 1/2-inch hardware in a 2x2 pattern, so 2-inch center to center between each hole. And basically that's going to make it so that if the customer ever calls me up and says, hey, Hot Metal Fab, I need a bracket to hold my shovel, or another jerry can, or whatever, I know that his Molle panel is set up for the 2x2 pattern, so all I got to do is design a bracket that fits with the 2x2 pattern, and he can bolt it on. The customer's not local. I actually drove from about an hour away, so it'll be convenient for me to do it like that, so I can just send him basically whatever he needs. The plasma gunner is going to get to work here. It's kind of mesmerizing to watch, actually. I wish we had a laser cutter, but for now the plasma works. We dial this thing in about once a week, keep it calibrated, keep it clean, keep all the belts tightened, so it runs pretty well. These holes, we upsize them. When I draw them, I draw them at 0.51 as opposed to 0.50, and they end up working great with a half-inch set of hardware. I'm going to go ahead and grind down all the plasma slag that's kind of left over. It's usually not a whole lot if our consumables are clean and clear. Go ahead and DA it, get it nice, shiny and bright, get rid of all the cut edges. Then I'm going to install these gussets that I made. These gussets are actually 1/4 inch, and these are just here to prevent the tubes from kind of wobbling any which way as the customer might go off-roading and cause some tweaking and torquing of the swing out. It's inevitable that it happens, but these gussets are going to prevent that as much as possible. I'm going to uninstall the swing out and go ahead and set it on the nice fabrication table that we've got here. This thing is hyper flat. It is hyper flat to within a 1/10,000th. And so I know that when I clamp something down there that's straight and square, it's going to come off of that table straight and square as long as I've got it clamped correctly, which I'm doing here, using a couple pieces of tubing to go across the bumper swing out. And what that's going to do is allow me to weld pretty quickly. I don't have to worry too much about timing with the welding and warping and all that stuff. I know that as long as I let the swing out cool on the table, it's gonna, and then once I unclamp it, it's gonna come out straight and square. I'm not concerned about that at all. Super nice to have this fabrication table. The planks are 3/4 of an inch thick with the 5/8 holes to use all the strong hand tooling. Once I got all that set up and squared up, I'm going to set the Molle panels in there, clamp those down the exact same way I clamped the tubes on. I drew the plates out in a dimension that sits them on the face of the tubes as opposed to sitting it on the center line of the tubes. It just makes it easier to set up, makes it easier to install stuff, I think, and overall just provides for a cleaner look. Some others may have the opinion that it should have gone on the center line. This customer gave me the free rein to do pretty much whatever I wanted to, allow him to have whatever adjustability he needed out of it. And so that's what I decided to do, was to put it on the face. So I'm going to go ahead and get all those welded up. I need to eventually move the clamps so I can weld the outside corners, that long 6-inch radius bend on the outside corners of the 2-hoop tube. So I'll go ahead and reset the clamps here to allow me to do those well. I'll just do one side at a time. There was a little bit of a break so I could let the other main structure welds cool down. I'm just going to quickly mark my start and stop using a whetstone and go ahead and weld that out. It's probably a 1.5 minutes worth of welding right there. I just take my time. Settings are a little on the low side. It's 120 wall tubing, and the actual plate material is 10 gauge, which is generally 0.145. So it's kind of thin, so my settings are a little bit low. I just want to make sure I take my time. I'm able to reposition all the way around the length of that weld, and it ends up looking pretty sweet once it's all done. Once that's all welded in, I'm going to go ahead and flip the swing out over, clamp it back down the exact same way I did on the front side, and weld on all the back side of the tubing. Go ahead and let it cool off in that tubing as well as it's clamped down on the fixture table. And when I go ahead and reinstall this thing, it's perfect. You could take any measurements, any angle measurement you want, and it's pretty much perfect all the way around. Unfortunately, I didn't grab any pictures of how I did the latch setup, but you can see it there. It's a little red-handled T latch that we get from our friends over there at Rough Stuff Specialties. I made a little landing pad for the tubing to actually land onto the bumper side of things on the passenger side, and that latches in at an angle so it both pulls forward and down at the same time. Anyways, enjoy the finished photos. Customer will be providing us with ones with the tire installed, and catch you guys on the next video.